Hello, everyone. It is Aussie Look back for a post-election post-mortem. I am once again here with Sormon. Welcome.
Hello.
It has certainly been an interesting election. I just want to get some thoughts about how you experienced it all.
I was definitely remember as I was sort of sitting in the booth, I was scrutineering, looking at the results coming through, and I was just like, this is a result like no other. I don't think we've. This could be. There were people saying this could be the start of a new era in politics. This could be the death of the two-party system, a system that has been with us since the 1910 election. So we've had this system for over 110 years, and it could finally be collapsing today with over a third, almost a third, I think, of Australian voters preferencing a party that's not Labor or the coalition.
Yeah, so this is, I believe, the lowest major parties have ever been. I think this is the lowest primary vote the coalition has ever gotten. I'm pretty sure about that. I'm also pretty sure this is the lowest the Labor Party, at least in any recent time, has ever gotten.
Yeah, probably
Um,
since 1929.
yeah, and I believe that this is the best the Greens have ever done. I think they did better than 2010. Um, this is the best that I think One Nation has ever done. Not the best that United Australia has done. I believe they got 5% in 2013. This is the best that hypothetically a party is able to get a majority of seats despite having the lowest they've gotten despite getting a majority of seats. So Labor's going to probably get a majority of seats on a primary vote of around 33%, which is just ridiculous. And some people would say that our electoral system is fucked, but they did win the two-party preferred by at least 52 to 48. I believe this is going to go. This is going to increase. The poll bludger believes that it's closer to 53, 47. On the AEC website, it currently has 52.5. So the polls. A lot of some people were going, "Oh, the polls. There was a poll fail." Nope, the polls were actually right. They were completely right.
The one part that were quite wrong was Labor's first preferences. Like I had convinced myself that no matter how this election was going to go, Albo was at least going to see at least a gain of 3%, like returned Labor into sort of high 30s going into this election. But he's arguably done worse than Shorten did in 2019, and I'm that's the part that's left me just completely gobsmacked. Like I was just not expecting um, Labour to go backwards in this election in the first preference vote. Like there was nothing indicating it. Look, if you, I guess, oh, actually, there was like a few, but you see, the vast majority of polls showed Labour at least on 35%.
Yeah.
Uh,
So the most
prefer-
accurate poll was actually Resolve Strategic, which had Labor on 31, Coalition on 34, Greens on 14. Greens did really well as I talked about. One Nation 6, UOP 4. So a lot of people actually doubted this poll. But it did have the Labor Party on 51-49. I believe there was sort of like if it was kind of iffy whether that was the actual result because it depended on respondent preferences and last election preferences. But largely, I generally think that the polls were a lot more correct than they were last election.
at
So
least in the two-party preferred.
yeah, yeah. Well, no, but okay, yeah, you're right. I mean, the primary vote is still an issue, but there was at least one poll that was on the money. That was on the money, pretty much. Yeah, but yeah, two party preferred. It was pretty on. Yeah, it was pretty right. Um, yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it seems the polls have changed, but there needs to be something done about the Labor Party primary vote about why that was so ridiculously high when it was. But Labor have still managed to pull off a victory, like probably a majority, despite getting such a low primary vote. So it doesn't really matter. Um,
Sometimes I look at the Labour primary vote in conjunction with the Greens. Like I do
yeah,
know a
you
lot
can
of
do that.
Greens voters don't have a negative view of the Labour Party. They're just, look, I like the Labour Party, I just like the Greens slightly more. So sometimes I usually take a little bit off the Greens vote. Say if you go back to the whole of it, Greens got a roughly around 11%. If we take about 10% of that, that might be a bit too high, and add that to Labour, you sort of get a rough estimate of around about 42% vote for the Labour Party from just people who just generally like the Labour Party, as opposed
Yeah.
to
Well, that's
even if
what
they don't
that's
necessarily
kind of
vote for
what
them
you have
themselves.
to look at these days. Like even though the Labor and the Greens are not in a coalition, if you want to look at sort of like in terms of how the Labor Party's vote is going to end up, you kind of have to look at like the Labor taking most of the Greens votes, and like usually about 85%, 80 to 85% of the Greens votes, and that's what happened this election. There was a lot of seats where the Labor Party was won the seat from behind due to Greens preferences, and I believe, I'm not sure about this. We'll probably find out about this later on. I believe that One Nation and UAP did not flow as strongly to the coalition as they did last elections. I could be wrong about that, but that's just kind of the vibe I'm getting, especially when it comes to UAP, because they did lead a pretty um, non-partisan sort of campaign. I mean, they arguably they were attacking Labor because they were preferencing Liberal in all the marginal seats, but when it came to like their advertising and stuff like that, there wasn't like a strong like anti-Labor sentiment in it. And so I believe the UAP probably didn't swing as much to the coalition. So let's just take a look at each state, the overalls, and just see how they did. So the Labor Party definitely improved in ACT, as well as the Greens, and the coalition suffered. In New South Wales, the Labor Party went backwards, just as they did in the national primary, but the coalition got backward a lot more. Greens went up, One Nation went up, UAP went up, and others went up as well. Northern Territory, Labor were down, the coalition were down, Greens are up, One Nation up. Well, that's it, yeah, 5%, and then United Australia up as well.
Yeah, remember that's just because they didn't field candidates in the last election.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yes, you are right about that. In Queensland, coalition lost 5. Labor actually improved their primary voting in Queensland, probably because it was just
It was
so bad
pretty
last
damn
time.
low in the last election.
Yep, yep. And they also got a two-party preferred swing of about 4 or 5% in Queensland. Actually,
Which means they're back into actual competitive territory as opposed to the landslide of the last election.
yeah. Well, they basically returned to kind of how they were in 2016, essentially. And yeah, actually, and a bit of a swing in New South Wales to Labor on the two-party preferred, a bit of a swing in Northern Territory, quite a big one in ACT actually. I think they already swung to the Labor Party last election as well, so it's a continued swing to Labor in the
The
ACT.
ACT is almost complete. Like we've got to get there in a bit when we get to the council result. It is likely the ACT might have kicked the Liberals out of the territory entirely in both houses.
Yep, I think that's what's going to happen. SA definitely a modest swing to Labor there. Tasmania. I'm actually surprised about this. There was a
Yes,
swing to Labor.
Tasmania is going to be the weird oddball here. It's the one that swung towards the Liberals.
2.1% swing to the coalition. You're right, in Tasmania. Why that happened? Do you have any idea about why that happened?
Yes, Tasmania Labor is not a very good party in recent memory. They are quite dysfunctional. If you watched the Tasmanian state election last year, there was a general sense that the Liberals weren't really riding on any big populist wave. Instead, the Labor Party was just there was a big bunch of infighting in the party. Several candidates got excommunicated, and it just feels like Tasmania Labor has not got their act together. And it was clear that that meant they were not fielding the strongest campaigns in the state. And that's probably why they've faced a backlash. Uh, we also have to identify that Bridget Archer was, unlike other moderates in the Liberal Party, she actually broke ranks with her party to vote against the coalition on things like the federal ICAC. And I think that might have saved her because people actually saw her as a genuine person and not just another Scott Morrison yes man.
Yep, yep.
That's another aspect of it.
Yeah, I agree that probably did um, go to some length to say Bridget Archer. There was a bit of a swing in Victoria. That's what like a lot of polls were predicting. There was only going to be a slight swing into Labor in Victoria,
Yeah, Labor was already pretty big there.
but it's really weird because as we'll talk about a bit later, like Labor managed to make quite a meal out of Victoria actually. But we'll talk about that later. And then in WA there was
This is where Labor won the election.
there was a cheeky 11% swing to the ALP in WA.
I believe this is the first time Labor has won the two party preferred in WA in something like over 40 years.
That is just extraordinary, and I'm still not sure. Okay, so let's we have some other minor parties, but they don't really matter in the House very much. Lambie managed to get 7%.
She's likely got the second senator in Tasmania.
Yeah, we will get to the Senate. Okay, so let's have a look at some seats because I mean there's still 13 seats in doubt. All right, let's start with the New South Wales seat. So, Banks, This was a seat that I was thinking could have gone to Labor, and it looks like there was about a bit of a swing to the Labor Party in the seat of Banks. It ended up staying with the coalition. This sort of went against the grain. There was quite a few seats which were have very large Asian population, and
Is this
that
in West Sydney?
Banks is in like southwest Sydney. I think, like, I guess you would say.
Has it
Um,
got country areas, parts of it, or is it completely
no,
metropolitan?
it's completely metropolitan. Unlike some of the other high Asian population seats, Banks did not get a huge swing, but there definitely was a swing. The seat of Bennelong is one of those high Asian population seats that looks like it probably will fall to the Labor Party. There was a
Yep,
8 point
2007 all over again.
8.1% swing to the ALP in the seat of Bennelong. The seat of Bradfield, there was a very strong independent challenger, but it looks like they have missed out. But there still was a massive 13.3% swing away from the Liberal Party there. So, that was definitely a valiant effort. The seat of Clare, there was another independent challenger, but they didn't get quite very far. Um, 6% in Scott Morrison's seat of Cook. Cowper was a seat where an independent looked quite threatening for quite a long time, but the Nationals managed to survive. There was a 6.4% swing from the Nationals, and I think this was the Nationals' sort of most closest call that they got in the election. Um, Ian Monaro and DeBell, they were easy keeps for the Labor Party. The seat
Yeah, I
of
think Labor will be feeling quite happy there.
Fowler, I did not look. There was a lot of talk about this, about how Christina Keneally would do in Fowler. Most people expected that she would get a pretty big swing against her, but she wouldn't lose the seat. But it appears that she has lost the seat of Fowler. What do you have to say about that, Sormon?
I think Labor made the wrong decision putting Christine Keneally in this seat. Um, I don't think Christine Keneally is that charismatic of a person. I've seen multiple videos of her talking in literally, even she's doing speeches, like let alone debates, she's just not very confident. The fact that Labor felt the need to parachute her into this seat that she really had no business being in, and instead and kicking out a potential local member, it even as someone who is a member of the Labor Party, the act was kind of disgusting, and in some respects, I'm kind of glad an independent won in this seat because it was not appropriate behaviour by the Labor Party. Um,
Do you think there's any question of her returning to the Senate after all of this?
well, she led New South Wales Labor into oblivion in the state government, and I'm kind of worried she would probably do the same in the federal government. It's probably best for New South Wales Labor that she just goes into retirement.
I was actually at a Labor event whilst this whole election went down, as you possibly were. I mean, I know you were scrutineering, but I don't
Yeah,
know
I
if
was
you.
at the event as well
Right.
after the
Yeah.
scrutineering.
And I know they were the Labor Party were very upset that that Christina Keneally lost the seat of Fowler. But I was thinking, like, I kind of expected it. And whilst I have nothing against Christina Keneally, and I'm sure she's a very nice lady, I don't think that she's a particularly amazing asset for the Labor Party. I don't think she's particularly popular, and she does sort of have still some baggage because of the New South Wales, her job as a New South Wales Premier, where she lost in a landslide. So I don't think it's a terrible loss for the Labor Party to lose Christina Keneally, but it will mean that this seat which was a safe Labor seat, will have this new independent who will probably be recontesting next time, and it won't be a
And if they
surefire win
entrench
for the Labor Party.
yeah, and if they entrench themselves, it could be difficult for Labor, especially because this is like the one seat in Labor's heartland that is now controlled by an independent, as opposed to a lot of other independents which are in the Liberal heartlands. So Labor's going to
Yeah.
have their own difficulty in trying to win this seat back.
All right. So Gilmore might be the only seat that the Liberal Party might win from the Labor Party. They are currently ahead by, it looks, about 300 votes.
I'm
Um,
generally surprised about this one.
there was a lot of talk about the Labor Party could possibly lose Gilmore. But there was that MRP polling which showed Labor was ahead 53-47, and then after that we were kind of thinking like, oh well, it probably it won't happen after that. But
The big thing is it's Andrew Constance that I'm surprised about because you remember the Bega by-election earlier this year, right? And how Labor picked up that seat for the first time in like 30 years or something. So yeah, I'm just very surprised about Andrew Constance because in the Bega by-election he got such huge swings against him, or like against his old seat, and Labor picked it up. I was like, I thought that must have been because people don't like Andrew Constance, and even if he wasn't in the member, it was just his legacy that led them to flip Bega. But that's why I'm just generally surprised that he's been able to actually potentially pull off a win here in the seat of Gilmore.
also that it's the only seat that's going against the grain as well. But they still could yet not win it. It is a pretty close margin. So we'll
I
just
am
have
interested to see where the pre-polls go and if a lot of Labor voters voted in pre-poll. It's something across this whole election I've actually been interested about. If the results are actually quite bad for the Labor Party right now because a lot of the Labor voters voted pre-poll. We won't know that until obviously Monday, Tuesday when all the pre-polls come through. But it's just something that's been nagging me, wondering if that's
yeah.
what's happened.
Well, there's 83% counted. So I don't know. There is still hope for the Labor Party here. I mean, obviously that's why the ABC hasn't called it yet. Albanese won the seat of Greenlaw. He got a swing to him, a very small swing actually. Um, there was no drama there, so we can move on. The seat of Greenway, this was one I was expecting could fall to the coalition, but instead there was a 9.5% swing to the LP, which I believe was the um, largest swing outside of like a independent or WA. Like I was completely wrong about that seat. Yeah, so there was meant to be an independent challenger in Hughes.
Well,
Uh,
Craig Kelly didn't come close.
Craig Kelly got 7.5%, which is a bit better than the national average for the United Australia Party. Um, Actually, it was a 5% swing to him. They only got 2.5% last time. But independent Georgia Steele, who a lot of people, including the betting sites, were expecting would do well here, um, didn't quite hit the mark, and the coalition will manage to win that seat. So, yeah,
Again, that's LNP Heartland. It was going to be strange
yeah,
if
it's just the south of Scott Morrison's seat, Cook. So yeah, it would have been difficult for them to win that seat. So the seat of Hunter, um, this was one that a lot of people were expecting could go to the Nationals or even One Nation. It ended up with the Labor Party getting a slight swing to them. I can't really say exactly. Wow, One Nation got a massive swing against them. Interesting. I can't exactly say
yes.
what caused this, other than I guess cost of living issues being a lot more important than just like coal mining, coal mining, coal mining, which is all the nationals and the One Nation sort of bagged on. So obviously, maybe the seat of Hunter is changing. It's not such a big.
Also, the One Nation people who follow One Nation preferences might have returned back to Labor, and sometimes that can sometimes up the Labor count, which is why you might have seen that little 8%, little 0.8% swing towards the party.
Yeah, but
But on the
why did
you
why
gone?
did they turn away from One Nation? What about it what about it decided that they would turn away from One Nation? They wouldn't vote for them. Is it because that Labor seemed to be a lot more moderate on the issue of climate change?
Uh, that I also think One Nation kind of got drowned out a bit by Palmer United. I definitely haven't seen that much about One Nation in this election. They went well. My job in South Australia, which is not really their heartland,
Hey,
but I get
well, we will come to South Australia, but there is something interesting about One Nation in South Australia later
yeah.
on that we'll get to. All right, let's move on. So, the seat of Lindsay, this was one that a lot of people were expecting were going to go to Labor. It actually had a bit of a swing to the Liberal Party. Again, not exactly sure why. It might have been something to do with this is the kind of seat that the coalition was sort of targeting with their whole like Catherine Deves transphobia stuff. Maybe this sort of is it's like an outer suburban seat. So maybe the social conservatives swung it to the Liberal Party a little bit. But if this was the effect of the Catherine Deves thing, then it's a pretty lousy effect, saving one seat and getting a one. There was a poll by like 10 News about a week or two ago, which had the coalition winning by about 57, 43. So that poll was actually pretty accurate, it seems. The seat of McKellar, massive surprise. A lot of people expected possibly North Sydney, possibly Wentworth, but McKellar was one where I did hear that there was talk of a Teal Independent doing well there, but I wasn't like Sophie Scamps. I did not expect this seat to fall.
In general, the Teal Independents have vastly overperformed what anyone thought they were going to do. Like we thought they were going to win maybe one, two, or three of these seats, mainly Kooyong and I think Goldstein and Victoria, but they have just dominated in this election. And McKellar's
Absolutely.
obviously an example of that. They've got those far-reaching ones that we weren't expecting them to get.
Yeah, because I was expecting only one seat, and the reason was because in previous elections gone by, there's always talks of independence um, in this seat and that seat and that seat, but they never seem to really get anywhere. It never seems to really do anything. And also, like, I recognize that these people in these seats aren't particularly happy with Scott Morrison, but they still voted for him pretty overwhelmingly in the last election, and he hasn't changed that much. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about that. We'll talk about that in your video.
I
um,
think more. I think we'll talk about my view. I think Australia's changed less so that the government's
Yeah,
changed.
yeah. Well, I don't know, but like, yeah, I just not did not expect this massive, huge swing away from the coalition, which we saw in Keller to an independent. Like when the swing was definitely was a swing last election to Labor in seats like this, but it wasn't this massive, like, completely ground changing situation. Macquarie swung to the Labor Party by a fair bit. This was a marginal seat. New England, Barnaby Joyce had a bit of a swing against him, but not much. North Sydney, another amazing teal independent seat. This one actually was kind of interesting because for a little bit we were wondering if it would be between the Labor Party or Kalia Tink for.
I would suspect the Greens would have probably preference. Well, maybe not actually. Yeah, it definitely could have. It's a few seats, especially when we get to the Queensland seats, where a lot of it's about who comes in third place that's determining the outcome, as opposed to just raw votes.
So I don't exactly know what happened here. But apparently the Greens must have preferenced Carly Tink, and she got into second place and beat Trans Zimmerman. Because I was wondering for a while what was going to happen here, because if it was between Trans Zimmerman and a Labor Party, it wasn't really conclusive who was going to win. Although some polls had shown that Labor could win the seat of North Sydney, but yeah, Page was one that I thought actually would go a bit more of a swing to Labor. Mainly because of the climate change vote, but there also was some polls that were indicating it, but it actually had a bit of a swing to the National Party. So whatever.
It's just in general, the Nationals have done quite well, despite being sort of made as the ultimate villains of this election. Because a lot of the rhetoric's been about Scott Morrison being a puppet of the Nats seem to remain extremely popular in their seats in general.
Well, I won't get into it too much in this video, but I guess if I was to have a theory as to why, is that um, a lot of people in these national seats perhaps did not believe in the idea of net zero, and they sort of followed the Nationals line, spoken by people like Matt Canavan, that net zero was dead, and they didn't actually believe in it. So they've sort of kept their climate change denying base. I don't know if that's an accurate representation of national voters, but that's just the theory. We can discuss that
It's
in your
mainly a
video.
bit. I've heard a lot of it around plain speaking and how they sort of speak their minds a lot more than some of the other politicians.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe yeah. I mean, Barnaby Joyce, was he leader at the last election, or was it Michael McCormack?
Uh, I think it was actually Michael McCormack. I think Barney Joyce was leader in the 2016 election.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, maybe it was Barnaby Joyce coming back helped. I don't know, but he'll probably stay on as national leader. Parramatta was one that Scott Morrison was really targeting, but it ended up having a bit of a
Um,
swing to the
That was
ALP
another one
instead.
of those parachuted Labour candidates. However, I think Andrew Charlton, I think he just had a bit more charisma than Christine Keneally. Plus, he also didn't lead the Labour Party into an election oblivion.
I
in
believe he had more of a connection to the area too, as far as I have heard. So, yeah. The seat of Patterson, this was one that some people were talking could go to the Libs, and did have a bit of a swing to them, but yeah. Reed, this is the seat, one of the two seats that I campaigned in. The other one was Banks. This was a big win for Sally Situ. There was an 8.6% swing to the ALP. Fiona Martin was clearly on the nose. Amazing win for the Labor Party. This was one that a lot of people, including myself, expected to go to the Labor Party. So not too many surprises here. And well done to Sally Situ.
Yeah. So if any seat was going to fall in New South Wales, Reid was the first one on the chopping block. So it's no surprise that that one
That's
fell.
right. And the second one is actually Robertson down here, but we'll talk about Richmond first. So
Yeah, Richmond seems to be going from safe ALP to ALP likely. I think the Greens just might be getting a few extra votes that a few people weren't expecting.
Yeah, so the Richmond was a sort of a three-cornered contest. This was a Labor Party seat before, but the Greens got a massive swing to them. The Nationals got a massive swing against them, kind of going against the grain. But I guess that's climate change and floods for you, and that's what happens.
I find it hard to think the Nationals will be preferencing the Greens in this election.
Yeah, so yeah, you would think that probably Nationals would probably preference Labor over the Greens, as that's why Labor wins the seat. But this was one that the Greens were looking at pretty early on, and they've done a pretty good job. Um,
It's
but
really a question of do the national voters put partisanship or do they put ideology first?
mm, the seat of Riverina, I want to see how the Shooters Fishers did because I know that they didn't put much money into it. They only got 6%. Um,
Yeah, the shooters and fishers have seemed to have kind of imploded since the 2019 New South Wales election,
Yeah, apparently
unfortunately.
they put a lot of money into that, and they haven't really put money into anything since. So that's fair enough for them.
Like
But
Helen Dalton got kicked out of the party, so they kind of lost their star member, in my opinion.
right, I didn't even know about that. I'm not following New South Wales state politics at all.
Oh, I
So
follow Helen Dalton a bit because obviously she appears on Friendly Geordies quite a bit.
oh, okay, all right, fair enough. So Robertson, this was another win for the Labor Party, a big win. This is one that I also predicted would be a win for the Labor Party. So congratulations, Gordon Reid, who's actually, I think, a relative of my grandma or something. So I guess he's a relative of me. So or a relative
Is
of
he
her
relative?
friend or something. I'm not sure.
Is he relative of George Reid from from the original Parliament? That's where the seat Reid gets its name from. Was our fourth Prime Minister.
Oh yeah, well I don't know. Like I remember when we were in Reed, we were talking about that Gordon Reed should have run in Reed, but I mean that's he doesn't live there, so that makes sense for him to go here. So Shortland swing to the ALP. Well done, Tanya Plibersek, even though she got a swing to the Greens. Warringah, Catherine Deeves was defeated. There was a 4% swing to an independent. So there was some talk of Catherine Deeves perhaps getting a close result in the seat, but that did not eventuate at all. So
Yeah,
she
it
got
seems
hammered.
like Morrison's attempt to try and play off the culture wars here did not work, especially since this seat likely fell because the voters are quite progressive. So
Yeah,
I don't know what they were thinking, putting a candidate like it was like, hey, you know how you hated Tony Abbott? Yeah, here's another Tony Abbott. It's like, what were you thinking?
yeah. Here's Tony Abbott, but but this person doesn't.
Worse.
They don't seem to at least go and fight fires and do life saving and stuff like that. So yeah, they don't even have any of the redeemable qualities of Tony Abbott. Wentworth, another seat that fell to a Teal
I
independent.
I'm also just wondering how the heck Dave Sharma even got in the first place. Like, if I always thought when Wentworth got rid of Malcolm Turnbull and put in Karen Phelps, I think it was. I thought she was going to hold that seat, and then Dave Sharma won it, and I was like, oh, maybe Wentworth is just very party loyal, and
I
then now they've done
guess
this.
I guess a lot of Liberal Party people, people who voted for the Liberal Party in 2019, realized what kind of guy Scott Morrison was and decided that's not for me. At the time, they weren't too sure. Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah,
it
but
almost seems
yeah, sorry, go on.
to me like a prime minister can't last longer than 3 years before getting on the nose. It's like people get sick of each prime minister if they hang on for too long.
That's what I'm interested in where Albo will come, but we'll talk about that in the next video.
Yeah, yeah. And that's it for New South Wales. Where there was a talk of it going to the Libs, but no, not really. And yeah.
All right,
Um, so
I guess it's
let's
Victoria now.
talk about Victoria. Okay, we'll start with Casey. This was one that some people were thinking that could be a shoe in for the Labor Party, but that did not eventuate. There was a swing to the ALP, but it did not happen. The seat of
Where is Casey again?
it is just east of Melbourne. It's actually technically a
Okay,
sort of like a regional seat, actually, but
next.
only
Okay,
barely.
yeah, yeah.
The seat of Chisholm, here's one
Yeah.
that
Again, that's just like Reid. If any seat in Victoria was going to fall to the Labor Party, it was going to be Chisholm.
yeah, I expected this one would happen too. I
And
didn't
I mentioned
expect.
it again. Chinese Australians, a lot of them were turned off from the Liberal Party because they were seeing them as being unnecessarily hawkish on China. Not going to say China hasn't done their own fair share of things to criticize, but yeah, I just there was just a general turn off. I think with just the general war rhetoric the coalition was using to try and get elected, seemingly backfired massively with Chinese Australians.
Yeah, and there was a lot of attack ads on Gladys Liu, and she wasn't very good in some of her performances that she did as well. So
And the fact that she cheated to get in 2019.
and that as well. So yeah, 8% swing to the ALP. That was a big win for the Labor Party. Um, the seat of Cooper did have a bit of a swing to the Greens, but it did not change anything really. Corangamite, this was one that a lot of people were expecting would be on the knife edge, but it actually had a massive 7.7 swing to the ALP, so that absolutely did not eventuate. The seat
Yeah,
of
Victoria's
Deakin,
definitely Labor's definitely sandbagged a lot of seats in Victoria.
the seat of Deakin is probably one of the biggest surprises where Labor are actually ahead. This is not one that a lot of people were expecting the Labor Party to win.
Whereas every time I see these seats named after former prime ministers, all I'm thinking of is just giving you trivia facts about who Alfred Deakin was. For instance, he looks like my uncle.
Dunkley was a seat some people were talking about would go to the coalition, but that did not happen. There was a swing to the ALP. Flinders, again, a little bit of a swing to the ALP. Goldstein, this was the only independent that I predicted would win a seat that actually, won a seat. Not incredibly surprising, but this puts an end to Tim Wilson.
Yeah, Goldstein was like it was so I was talking earlier about Reid and Chisholm being the first to fall to Labor in their states. Goldstein was obviously going to be the first to fall to an independent. Although to be honest, I don't think Zoe Daniel won by the largest margin. Now, some of the other independent gains are actually much more decisive than Goldstein.
Higgins, this was one that a lot of people talked about could go to the Labor Party. I did not expect that it was going to go.
Yeah, so we used to actually live in Higgins back in like 2001, and my mum used to tell me that she kind of hated voting in Higgins because she felt like her vote was for the Labor Party was completely useless. Guess that's how times have changed now because this obviously was the seat of Harold Holt and John Gorton, and has frequently been a safe seat for the Victorian Liberal Party. So yeah, this is obviously a big deal that Labor's taken Higgins. I'm
Perhaps
not sure about you, but I was predicting Kooyong to fall.
a lot of people were. I just thought that like somehow Josh Frydenberg would hang on. I just didn't quite believe that it would happen.
Maybe I
Um,
was watching too much propaganda, but he just did not handle himself well in the debates. He came across as slimy and disingenuous. Like when she attacked Morrison, rather than go try and distance himself from Morrison or say point out his own achievements, he just went to the same government talking points that they just keep using. It's also this is where Simon Holmes, the guy who funded the Teal Independence, I remember he was actually at Monique Ryan's uh, party. Like Kooyong was sort of the center of his Climate 200 movement. Like, because I was reading his Wikipedia page today, he actually had a big fallout with Josh Frydenberg, and in some respects, he's now sort of had his revenge and now successfully kicked the treasurer out of power.
yeah, well, at least one billionaire has made gains this election. So I agree, absolutely agree with you that Monique Ryan did absolutely fantastic in that debate, and that probably sealed the deal for a lot of people. Going against a established politician and doing that well in a political debate was astounding. McNamara was a seat that a lot of people were expecting could have gone to the Greens at some point. They did pretty well, but evidently there will be enough people preferencing the Labor Party over the Greens out of all of these other parties, including the Liberal Party, that the Labor Party will manage to hang on for that seat, but that one is still not completely counted. So that's another one that the Greens could pick up. Um,
The Greens have made decent gains in Victoria and New South Wales, but it's strange that pretty much all the seats they picked up are in Queensland. When we get to that point, obviously Melbourne was a very easy retain for Adam Bant. I think he's going to be holding that seat for a very long time.
Yeah, but it's actually a bit of a surprise that there was actually a 12% swing away from the Greens in the seat of Melbourne. So I don't exactly know what caused that. If it was just like a return to form for the Labour Party with Anthony Albanese. Menzies was a big surprise that it was so close. The Liberal Party were only barely ahead by about 600 votes. Oh,
Is this is
apologies.
this is
No,
this where I make the
sorry.
joke that the Liberal Party not only lost the seat of Menzies, they might also lose the seat of Menzies. Get it?
Oh, right.
Because Kooyong was Menzies' seat.
Oh, nice, 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 nice. I appreciate that. Um, yeah, so it's another one of these surprising seats in Victoria that the Labor Party might even push through. It's like almost every metropolitan seat in Victoria that Labor Party is either doing well or only lose by a little bit on. And that's pretty much it for the state of Victoria. The seat of Nichols. I will mention that the Independent definitely gave it a good fight in that seat, but the Nationals
But it seems like
survived.
Barnaby Joyce will be able to. So Barnaby Joyce seems to have held his record as being the Nationals leader that hasn't lost a single seat. All right, now we go to arguably the state I think a lot of us were going to be watching this election, which is Queensland.
So going into this, I didn't expect much to happen in Queensland.
Yes, I remember that. We had a bit of an argument over that.
Yeah, because obviously the coalition have a lot of seats in Queensland, but I thought that Scott Morrison is relatively popular in the state, so there isn't going to be too much of a change. All there really was, as we explained earlier, sort of like a
Return
return
to normal. Return
return
to
back
normal.
into the like 2016 numbers in terms of swings. The Labor Party didn't make many gains in Queensland. In fact, they're
But just
probably
to start, look at seats like Boner and Bowman, and you can see Labor is no longer, you know, completely out of reach of those seats. They've narrowed the gap up to these seats are now they're not exactly marginal, but they're now somewhat safe seats as opposed to the ultra safe seats they were in 2019.
yeah. I mean, but yeah, I mean, like still putting Bonner on a margin of 2.7% is still pretty good. Like that's a seat that like a lot of people associate with the coalition. And then other seats like Bowman have become in the marginal territory of 5.1% margin. All right, so the seat of Brisbane, very interesting seat. Um, this is one that the Labor Party and the Greens had a very close contest on, and yeah, this was a three-way race. Surprisingly, again, preferences have benefited the Greens over the Labor Party, evidently, because the Greens have managed to stay ahead of the Labor Party. Probably because of the help of the Animal Justice Party, I'd say would be quite a part of that. And the Greens have managed to defeat Trevor Evans of the Liberal Party. I did say that this seat would flip, but I did say in my predictions that this would actually flip to the Labor Party. But the Greens managed to get a 6% swing to them. The coalition is
It's
11%
been
swing
quite
against them.
interesting that even in like, the other seats like Ryan and Griffith, the pickups have nearly all been Greens. I don't think Labor's picked up a single seat in Queensland, to my
That's
knowledge,
right. That's
unless
right. They've actually gone backwards in Queensland, which is a lot of. I was expecting them to not do very well in Queensland, but I did not expect them to to go backwards, and especially to the Greens. Like I was saying on election day, I remember I was talking to a Greens person at the booth. I'm like, do you think Greens might do all right in southeastern Queensland? They might win a seat. I thought maybe they'd win Ryan or Brisbane. I didn't expect the Greens to do as well as they did, and I don't think a lot of people expected the Greens to do as well
I'm
as they did.
I'm not sure this is the right time to talk about this, but I wonder if this result is actually the people of Brisbane finally saying enough is enough as they've watched their state basically become the state of coal and conspiracy theorists and far right wing nut jobs. And they're like, I am sick and tired as a social progressive of being in this state that is characterized by giving us some of the most hard right wing politicians that I'm going to go right over to the Greens and make Brisbane a green haven to finally basically tilt the scales in the other direction and actually get this state some progressives into parliament. I'm just curious if this large green result in the heart of Brisbane is just the more progressive minded people of Brisbane saying enough is enough as Queensland continues to be characterized by far right wing people like Clive Palmer and Pauline Hanson and also like Matt Caravan and stuff.
Matt Canavan.
Caravan. It's caravan.
Right. So we saw quite big swings to Labor in Capricornia and Dawson. Of course, it doesn't mean too much because these seats have massive margins.
But
Um,
again, they've made these seats a lot more marginal going into the next
yes, that's right.
election.
So the seat of Dixon, this was one interestingly the ABC called for the Labor Party really earlier in the night, and I still don't know why they did that. But Peter Dutton has managed to
Must have
hang
been a
on.
fluke booth. Must have been a fluke booth that gave them a really large result.
Yeah, I guess it would have been. So yeah, Peter Dutton did manage to hang on. The Greens and Labor got swings to them. Peter Dutton swing away from him. So he might become the leader of the Liberal Party. He's definitely.
He's the most likely to take the role of the Liberal leader, being the most high profile Liberal who's either not
Yeah,
resigned or defeated.
but if he does become the leader, then he will have a seat, one of the most marginal seats in the country, to contest. So that's going to be very interesting.
Look,
That's all I
just a
have to say.
reminder: the detail I point out about Dixon every time is he held when Queensland fell to Labor in 2007. Like Rudd picked up like 9 seats in Queensland. Dixon held on. Peter Dutton was somehow able to find it in his base to hold on to that seat, which partially indicates that Dixon might have a sizable Nationals population, even though it's like only 51% of the entire booth. That's a very solid 51%.
Yeah, it might be very, very difficult to unseat him, and maybe that's why it won't be too bad if he becomes leader and goes to the next election on that. We will see in 3 years' time. Right, so we have a lot of LNP seats that had swings against them um, that sort of
Again,
return to
Labor
normal.
should be reasonably happy going into the next election that Queensland is now at least winnable for them, unlike which it wasn't going into this election.
Yeah, so they have a better chance next election, maybe if the Queenslanders are more familiar with Albanese. Griffith, this was a
Poor old Kevin Rudd.
Kevin Rudd's old seat of Griffith was won by the Greens. It wasn't so much that Labor got a massive swing against them, it's just that the Greens had a massive swing to them. This was one that they said was the most likely for them to win, and it looks like they were actually correct. They have won the seat of Griffith, and this is.
I guess I was expecting a bit more coalescing around Labor going into this election, which again we haven't seen that, and it's led me to wonder again: is this Brisbane finally saying enough is enough? We hate being seen as the crazy right wing state.
So yeah, Longman was one that Labor Party could have picked up, but it didn't eventuate. And as for the rest of Queensland, was pretty static, apart from the seat of Ryan, where the Greens have managed to succeed in another Liberal Party seat, 10% swing to the Greens. And yeah, the Greens have absolutely performed exceptionally well in Queensland, and I'm sure they're very, very happy with their result in Queensland. Right, WA. Have a look at these swings.
Let's just
10.5%.
let's just put it this way: when I was watching this count come through, um, I was like, these results are not very decisive. Like the Labor Party is not winning the seats it needs to in Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. And it felt like it was a repeat of 2019 again. We were once again putting our hopes on WA. But unlike in 2019, where WA delivered nothing for Labor, in this election, it's arguably delivered them the election. It is strange to think that arguably probably even more blue than Queensland in some respects, WA has actually been the state to bring Labor into government just with the sheer amount of seats they won and the swings they got.
LP managed to pick up Haslock. This was one that polls were suggesting that the coalition would hang on to, but that did not happen. Looks like they're probably just going to get missed out on the seat of Moore, which is a
Which would have resulted in the Liberals losing every seat in Perth.
yes. Labor have also won Pierce, and they've also won Tangney, which had like a margin of like 9.9%.
Oh, and they
And
won Swan.
yes, yes, they have won the Cedars one. So massive, massive swings to the ALP everywhere in Western Australia. As for Curtin, this was, I'd say, not only a massive swing. Actually, no, Labor Party had a swing against them of 5%, but there was a massive independent vote, and Kate Janey has picked up the seat of Curtin, which all of these independent seats, I don't need to say it because everyone else has said it, but they're stronghold Liberal seats that these independents are doing amazingly well in, and it's a big surprise for everyone involved.
Now I get to talk now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So South Australia, big important state for two reasons, and those two reasons are Boothby and Sturt. Boothby was a big win for the Labor Party.
It was a
Um,
predicted. It basically, as someone on the ground, Boothby was always sort of seen as a lost cause by the Liberal Party, even if it had been a seat that had been Liberal controlled for 70 years.
yeah, like a lot of people were expecting Boothby would fall. The seat of Sturt was a bit of a surprise. The Labor Party could win this seat yet. You were actually
You
campaigning in.
can. Yes, I was campaigning in Sturt. We were trying for the Hail Mary long shot to try and take the Liberals completely out of Adelaide, and we are close. Like it's really going to come down to. We talked about this earlier. The pre polls. Is it possible that a lot of Labor voters pre-polled? We don't know, but if that is true, there is a solid chance we could be knocking not only James Stevens out of Adelaide, but basically the entire Liberal presence out of Adelaide, leaving them only with Barker and Gray.
So the Greens actually also did pretty well in the seat. They got a swing of 5%. This was, I reckon, Sturt would have been a seat where an independent would have done well as well.
Yeah,
Um,
perhaps Joe Dye should have run in here instead of Boothby. Because if you look at Joe Dye, who was one of the Climate 200s that a lot of people were putting money on, she did terrible in Boothby.
yeah, I think there was some drama about like whether she had like citizenship of another country or something like that, but that
But that
probably
shouldn't have
hurt
that
it.
shouldn't have tanked your campaign. I think what tanked it is just a Labor was big there. Like Labor was sort of like pretty much half the Labor team was in Boothby trying to win that seat. So yeah, it was a
Yeah,
very
I
strong
mean,
campaign there.
it was one of the most marginal seats in the country, and easily the most marginal in the state of South Australia. And after that big South Australian win in the state election, they knew that there absolutely was some at least some momentum there. Now,
Speaking about decisively to Labor, let's talk about the one state that actually went decisively to the Liberals.
So Tasmania, weird state. There was a swing to the coalition in Lyons, where the ALP might only barely hang on. There was a swing to the coalition in Braddon, and Braddon is no longer a marginal seat. And there was a slight swing towards the coalition in Bass,
As I was
where
saying
Bridget.
earlier, this is likely Bridget Archer being rewarded for actually being semi-independent from her party ranks.
Yeah, so I guess there'll be a lot of analysis from a lot of people about what exactly happened in Tasmania that made the coalition succeed here. I was expecting that Labor Party would win one seat in Tasmania. They managed to win zero. And this was actually happened really early in the night as well. And a lot of Labor Party were getting very anxious when they saw Tasmania were falling to the Libs, and they were wondering if this is going to be a nationwide thing. But nope, it was only confined to Tasmania, which is
And
very
yeah,
strange.
luckily for them, even if it had been worse in Tasmania, Tasmania only has two seats the Labor were defending, so it wasn't a huge deal that this happened. Labor won in the bigger states, which is the main thing for them.
So, just taking a look at seats in doubt, I'll just kind of count up the numbers that ALP are ahead. They're ahead in one, two, three, four, five. So, if that happens, the ALP will manage to get a majority. They'll manage to get 77 seats, and they will not need to worry about any of the crossbench in order to form government. So, they only need four of that five actually for that to be the case. So Anthony Albanese is absolutely taken an election victory. There's absolutely is a victory for the Labor Party. Perhaps not as big as many seats coming into government, but still a win. And it's really a question for Anthony Albanese about if he's able to translate that win into something bigger next time. Now that he's established himself as the Prime Minister, we'll see about that. But absolutely a big loss for the coalition. That was a Scott Morrison has undoubtedly thrashed his own political party, destroyed his own political party with this result. Um, so let's talk about the Senate. The Senate is actually a very interesting race. And let's start with New South Wales. So New South Wales and Tasmania are probably the most conclusive states out of everything. Or as also, I guess, Northern Territory as well, but that's kind of obvious. The Liberal Party will probably win three seats here, the Labor Party two, and the Greens one. One Nation does have a chance in New South Wales, but they'll need a lot of preferences from the United Australia Party, legalize cannabis, etc.
And the
Uh,
fact that the Liberals are on 2.5 quotas probably means they're probably going to get that third one.
they probably will. I would put my money on it. But yeah, the Pauline Hanson has a chance. Victoria, on the other hand, it looks like a United Australia Party candidate is currently in the ahead to get the sixth seat in Victoria, which is something that I actually somewhat predicted in my.
I'm a little skeptical because the legalized cannabis and Animal Justice Party will likely preference either the Greens or the Labor Party ahead of the UAP. Just because they're in fourth place, I'm not sure if that quite guarantees that they're going to get that sixth spot.
Well, yeah, well that's the kind of the question. Like One Nation will probably go to UAP. The Liberal National Surplus will probably go somewhat to the UAP. Um, the Greens also have a tad bit of a surplus too, so that will probably go to Labor. So it's basically a contest between Labor getting a third seat in in Victoria and the UAP getting a seat. Possibly legalized cannabis could miraculously do something with help from the Animal Justice Party and the Liberal Democrats, maybe the shooters. I don't know. Um, that last seat is a mystery. At the moment, United Australia is ahead, but the Labor Party definitely have a chance on that. Queensland. A lot of people were reporting that Pauline Hanson had lost her seat in Queensland, but I don't think that is the case. I think she will win the seat, but there is an absolutely valiant effort by Legalised Cannabis Australia getting 7% in Queensland. Who knew there were this many potheads in Queensland? What do you have to say about this, Sormon?
Well, the legalized cannabis party bet Clive Palmer again here as well. They bet them in 2020. Uh, they're an interesting party. I have friends who are somewhat who do like smoking pot. So it is possible. Actually, I'm not sure we're allowed to say this online. We might get demonetized. Um, like I they just it just must have a. It's 6.7% is quite large. That is a spot. I did not realize that that drug was so popular. Like it just, I don't know really what to say. To be honest, just wow.
Yeah, so it'll probably be two coalition, two Labor, one's Greens, and probably One Nation, I'd say. Um, but
Like
legalized
most
cannabis has
likely,
a chance once again in this state. So
just add the UAP premises in there, and they're pretty much at the quota.
yeah, with UAP, Pauline Hanson will probably win a seat there. Yeah. So WA is a state where Labor could get three seats, which is amazing.
I
But
was really hoping for a lot more where they'd get 3 seats. I was really hoping for it in Victoria and stuff.
Well, no, it could still happen in Victoria. It absolutely still could happen in Victoria. But yeah, WA is probably the most likely. The biggest competition is either Pauline Hanson or legalized cannabis. Legalized cannabis, if you might know, they managed to get two seats in the WA upper house, so they
Yes,
already
I
have
remember
a
that.
presence in WA. So they could scrape by with another one. But I think it's probably going to be the Labor Party getting three seats here, which is pretty amazing for them. And I thought that they would get three seats in the SA, but they actually got three seats in WA. I thought that the sort of the Labor domination from the election had kind of worn off by now, and it probably has a little bit. But they actually did obviously very very well, and three seats is absolute amazing result for them, especially because the Greens are also getting a seat. In
Uh,
South
Big notable thing about South Australia is we finally are returning back to having two Green senators after 6 years of absence, after Robert Sims lost in the double dissolution election. So we now have our two Greens candidates back.
Right, yep, the Greens have won a seat here, most likely. As for the final seat, um, this is once again a big question mark. Pauline Hanson is probably up against Labor to win three seats, or possibly the
Yeah.
Liberal Party to win three seats in South Australia. What do you think is going to happen?
Have you want a fun? Not so much what I think of it. One fun fact: Jennifer Game, the One Nation candidate who's likely won, she's actually the mother of the one who won the legislative council seat in the South Australian legislative council. She's the mother of that candidate. So it was believed that she actually dropped out of the state race to run for federal, and so it's possible that her ploy to run for the federal government instead of the state government, where the quota's higher, actually has paid off, and she possibly could come. But again, I'm a little skeptical. Like the Liberals, there's a high chance Liberals might actually preference Labor over Pauline Hanson, just the more moderate Liberal sex. And again, I don't know, Group O, that's Nick Xenophon, who obviously did pretty terrible despite the name. Uh, he could also preference Labor, so it is possible that Pauline Hanson could win, but 0.28 um, quotas is not super decisive. I guess you have to throw in probably the UAP, which would push her up to sort of close to 0.5, which I guess could make it possible. Um, but again, it's got to come down to a big preference game. I think Anthony Green was quite correct when he said South Australia is probably one of the hardest ones to guess what the final Senate is going to look like.
Yep. I completely agree with everything you just said. Uh, Northern Territory really isn't much to say.
There's nothing to talk about here.
Yeah. As for Tasmania, this was kind of what was expected. Two Liberal, two Labor, one Green, and one Lambie. Lambie's running mate, I guess you would call her, Tammy Tyrell. I was expecting that she would probably win this seat because they really
It's
just
interesting because
wasn't.
she's running on the party brand as opposed to previously only Lambie had ever been able to win for her party because of her own personal branding. So it's kind of interesting that she's been able to use her personal branding to get someone else elected.
Yes, it wasn't totally unexpected, but it is pretty amazing for Jackie Lambie that she's not only got herself but one of her running mates elected.
The ACT is the one that I'm most interested in
Right.
because the Liberals have a strong chance of being kicked out of the ACT entirely, having not like so for a long time. Zed Selja has always at least been one ACT Liberal representation at the federal level just because of how the Senate works. But due to the strength of David Pocock's campaign, he possibly, with Greens' preferences, will dethrone Zed and become the second senator in the ACT, which I don't think I've known any time when a party's had no representation in a state or territory. Because even when you lose all your seats, like even when Labor lost all the seats in Queensland, they still had like two senators.
There was talk in the 2019 election of similar thing happening with the Greens. That obviously did not eventuate. But finally, I think it's just been the situation of all of these metropolitan areas swinging so against the Liberal Party that someone has managed to take advantage of it, and they have. Mr. David Pocock will almost
Is
certainly.
he funded by Climate 200?
I don't know. I know they have called him sort of like a bit of a teal independent, um, but he will probably win the seat based on Green's preferences because they almost have a quota together. Um, so congratulations, Mr. Pocock. This is far from certain. Mostly in the final seats of Queensland, South Australia, Western Australia, and Victoria.
So basically, you need roughly 39 seats to form a majority of. Like, so obviously, someone's going to have to be House Speaker. Then you need 38 votes to pass anything in the Senate. As it currently stands, Labor and the Greens have a combined voting power of 38 if this ends up being true, which means that they almost effectively have control of the Senate, but they will probably need at least either Lambie or the independent David Pocock if he does win to pass legislation. Um, they possibly could get assistance from One Nation or Palmer, but yes, the Senate is definitely quite narrow. Labor definitely does. I was definitely hoping more for Labor picking up 3 seats in a few of these states, but it seems like they've
Yeah,
only been able to
but
pull that
I
off in
think
WA.
I think it's possible that Labor could win the final seats in Victoria or South Australia. In that case, they will have a majority with the Greens. But either way, I have to say this is a pretty good Senate for the left. I think it's possibly as good as they could have wished it to be, based
I
on.
think Lambie will help them out. I think Lambie's somewhat pro
Yeah, I mean
Labor.
Lambie agrees with them on most things, so generally it's absolutely a workable Senate. I think honestly Labor should just be glad that they managed to win 2 seats in Queensland and the Greens managed to keep theirs as well. So that was one thing that a lot of people were worried about might not happen, but yeah, they managed to do it. So congratulations. and Labor, and congratulations to the left, and also congratulations to these minor parties who I thought would never have a chance in the Senate after those 2016 Senate voting reforms, or 2015 voting reforms, whatever year it was. Um,
Turns out when enough people hate the major parties, anything's possible.
That's right. When the coalition's vote gets destroyed this much and minor parties do this well, you can get these random parties have a possibility to win seats. So exciting times, very exciting times for Australia. Definitely a much better election for the left than last election. All right, well, I think that is pretty much it. I'm just going to update the House with some of the seats that have changed. So we have Higgins, we have Chisholm, we have independents winning Kooyong and Goldstein, with an independent winning Curtin. We have the Labor Party winning Pearce, Hasluck, Swan, Tangney, possibly more. We have the Labor Party winning Boothby, possibly Sturt. We have the Labor Party winning uh, Robertson, Reid, possibly Bennelong. They seem to be winning there. Um, we have the Greens winning in Brisbane, Griffith, and Ryan, most likely. The Liberals picking back up Hughes and probably winning in Gilmore, taking a seat off the Labor Party. We have an independent winning in Fowler. Um, and the Labor Party are ahead in the seat of Deakin and just behind in the seat of Menzies. And independents managed to win the seats of Wentworth, North Sydney, and Mackellar. So I believe this is what things possibly could look like for the next parliament. Not that different from my prediction. I did get a couple of things wrong. I said that Labor Party wouldn't win Higgins, um, and I said the Labor Party would win Bass. But that was just a guess, to be honest. I didn't really know, and I didn't think Labor would do as well in Western Australia, and I didn't think Labor would. I didn't think the Independents would do as well as they would do. I didn't think the Greens would do as well as they did in southeastern Queensland. So I mean, it's a big surprise of an election. This election really threw me. It really threw me when I was watching it happen. I was like, what the hell is going on? And
Yeah,
I'm
this
probably
is this is a unprecedented election. I've never seen anything like this before in my life.
yeah. What was your sort of experience as the results were coming in? How did you? Well, that's right. You were scrutineering, and then you looked at your phone and you saw the results. And what was your reaction?
Like the swings were looking good for Labor. Like we didn't need a huge swing because it was already a pretty marginal parliament from last time. Um, I was a bit upset that we weren't quite getting the definitive win that I was hoping for. Like the big shock for me was obviously the lack of first preference vote for the Labor. But like Labor's won the seats that they need to win. Like it would have been nice to have them win 80 to 90 seats. But I guess a win is a win, and in some respects, the Greens and Climate 200's doing well, if anything, is going to push climate change to be a much bigger focus of this parliament, which is what we obviously talk about in my video of what the future of this parliament will be like. This is a general good result for definitely progressive minded people and those passionate about things like climate change and federal integrity.
All right. Well, I wonder what the future is going to hold. It's going to be very interesting times. Thank you for joining me on this quite long video, Sormon, but this was quite a long election, so it deserved a very long analysis too. And we will have even more stuff to say when we do a follow-up video on Sormon's channel, which will all be about how we got here and where do we go from here.
So, guys, to see part two of this video, we talk about a bit more about how this result came to be and what the future is for the Australian Parliament. Be sure to check out part two of this video, which will be on my channel shortly after this video comes out. And I'll see you then.
Thank you for watching, everyone. Goodbye.